Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to another of our live streams with Dr. Amy. Hi Amy, you all right?
Hi, great to see you both. Hi, Alice.
Hello.
I
Hi,
was gonna say,
everyone.
Alice, I've got an apology to make. I should have asked in the green room. I wouldn't know how to pronounce your surname
It's
correctly.
Guo. It's Guo.
Guo. There we go.
Yeah.
Alex Guo, sorry, that's very rude of me. But anyway, for those of you who've tuned into some of these discussions, the whole premise of this is Amy and I are writing a book about sort of innovation and digital transformation within the built environment, looking at sort of a real global perspective on it all. And we're live streaming all of our interviews with everybody that we're trying to have a chat with, partly because we know that we're never going to get all of the insights that all these fantastic people have into the book, and there'll be a bank of content and a bank of work that we know will be useful to some. For wherever you are at whatever stage of the journey that you're in your innovation world. So we're streaming these as much as you want. So genuinely, if you're joining us and you have a question for Alice or any of our guests for that matter, and by the way, there's my home gong. It's going to go off far too much because I'm not in my office. But if you have any comments or questions, please do pop them in the comments box, because I always will bring them in at some point, and very, very happy to answer them as well.
Timing should be really tight today with your clock regularly reminding us.
Well, it's so, I mean, honestly, the technology world, and I can't get the internet sorted in my office, which is just an absolute terror. But, anyway. Well, I tell you the worst bit, Amy, is the fact that the quarter past is almost all right, because it just goes bong bong, and then at the half past it goes bong 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 bong. So I really don't want to get to the quarter two when it's like 3.
It's really like terrible. An escalation of noise.
Yes, not so good. But anyway, Alice, do you give us a sort of a basic overview in terms of, basic overview. I mean, it's really difficult because you've had such a broad career. We'd love to just sort of get an understanding of sort of, your background and why you think that we sort of invited you to discuss all of this, because I'm interested in all of your background and insights.
Yeah, thanks again. Like I said, James and Amy, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Alice. I'm Alice Guo. I grew up in China, so I moved to Canada in high school and then attended universities in Canada. So I did a few internships in undergrad, and then specifically I did one in Shanghai, which is like, working in the heritage kind of conversion buildings in China, and then helping them with kind of commercial planning around the area. I really liked it. So I thought, real estate is what I wanted to do, and then ended up working in commercial real estate finance for the first 2 years of my career. And then in Canada specifically. And then my mentor encouraged me, he was like, it seems like you really like real estate. You should go to New York. That's where things the best projects are happening. And back in the days, Hudson Yard is still developing and being developed in New York. So I was like, yeah, I should be in New York. So I did my master's in real estate development at Columbia University. And then I happened to be in a class called Digitizing Real Estate Using Technology. It's taught by Zach Aarons, the co-founder in Metaprop. And yeah, Zach is my professor. I attended the Metaprop Accelerator with a lot of founders, and then I just never looked back again after that summer. So after I graduated, I started working with Fifth Wall. Fifth Wall back in the days was still, I guess, relatively early. They're still raising their second fund. And then I had a lot of great exposure, not only, learning how to kind of solving kind of like a real estate problem using a top-down approach. So back in the days, the way we invest is, we go to a lot of our LPs and then asking what are the key pain points they're kind of going through. And then we try to kind of nail down into the kind of solutions that would help them solve the problems. And we push a lot of innovation solutions to the LPs. And then that is really how we kind of form a lot of our investment thesis. So it was a super engaging process. I think, learned to kind of the industry best practices. And as part of that, also my time at Fifth Wall, they're also fundraising for their second fund. And then one of the mandate is they wanted to kind of expand globally. They not only wanted the insights from US real estate companies, they also wanted to see what an Asia Pacific, real estate developers want. What are the Europeans want? So since, I have the language capability, so I participated in some of the again, Asia Pacific LP calls. It was like super informative, even though I'm Chinese, I grew up in China, never really worked in China and then get to hear about all the problems. And then especially like one thing I think definitely triggered my interest in just knowing how much like smart city developments are happening in China specifically. So just to throw like a crazy number out there, like out of all of the smart city developments projects in the world, probably more than 2/3 are happening in China right now. And then there are like districts and new area being built in China on like kind of daily basis. And this is back in 2018. So I was like looking at that number, I was like, wow, like, I work in prop tech. And then it seems like, I kind of have to know what China's doing in order for me to kind of say, oh, I'm really utilizing my background as Chinese. So I had a really interesting opportunity to work with P9 Insurance. They're the one of the biggest, probably top 2 insurance company in China. And then they happen to be building a team that's related to digital real estate, smart city, and construction. So I joined that group and then just, moved back to Shanghai for a few years. And then that's when I co-founded Urban Lab. It is the biggest corporate accelerator program in PropTech in China with JLL, China, and Swire Properties. And then what we do is we gather a lot of PropTech startups in China and try to pilot with these 3 companies in their kind of internal business functions or on our properties and assets. And then a few years ago, I relocated back to Canada and I worked with Oxford Properties in their corporate innovation function. And then I headed a few kind of internal innovation pilots. And then about a year ago, I founded my own company. So there is a trend that a lot of the Chinese companies are expanding overseas. And then there's a great need for them to have someone who kind of knows the North American landscape and help them navigate the initial kind of market studies. And then also help them identify any legal and compliance red flags. And then also help them kind of understand the tech landscape. So it was first time I've done something alone, but I really enjoyed it and then learning a lot. So that's a little bit about my background, and then happy to share more. I've spent about 6 years in PropTech now, so not that long, but then I think PropTech overall is not that long of an industry. So I think there are a few things I can share, and especially I'm happy to kind of talk about my experience in China. Just I think like my lens is almost like a foreigner because I have never lived in China ever since I left at the age of 17. So this whole kind of experience of like living in China, going around, and then also like working in the corporates and understanding how things kind of work. And then especially at my role, I get to work with a lot of senior execs a lot. So I go to a lot of big conferences and meetings with my boss and to meet with like high ranking C-suites in different real estate companies in China. So I really get to learn like how people plan things there. And then I thought it was very interesting kind of experience and perspective. So I'm happy to share a few things and doing this this live stream today.
I mean, you have done more in 6 years than most have done in a lifetime, to be fair. And I think let me just I think it's really important to sort of set the scene. So when Amy and I were looking at sort of leaders to do these sort of discussions around leadership, innovation, digital transformation, you can't pigeonhole people into a certain box. And leadership comes from everywhere. And for me, certainly within the built world, experience around the venture, which I know you had obviously with Zach and Metaprop and Fifth Wall, now obviously your own side, experience within sort of what I would call the traditional real estate corporate innovation function. Those two things are often so polar opposite from each other. You don't get many people that have dealt with both sides in their careers, and that's for me was really an area. But before I sort of deep dive into that area, I think it would be really useful for Amy and I, because part of, I suppose, that the narrative that we're looking for within the book around leadership and perhaps the real estate industry more broadly is the understanding of the differences. So when you talk about North America on one hand and China on the other, and you said that when you went over with Fifth Wall and they started to look at what the real estate industry was looking for, Did you find that there were significant differences and between the markets? Were the problems that they were facing different, or were the challenges that the industry had the same?
I think there are stuff that is common across the world. Like, a lot of the questions or problems they're raising are very similar. However, there are area-specific issues and problems.
So
For
can you just
example,
give me an example of something which is similar to start with? Because I've often talked about the homogeneous nature of buildings, but I then read somewhere that they were saying actually two buildings, and this was it very much in reference to digital twin technology. And they were saying that two buildings might just look the same and they might serve the same function, but actually two buildings that look the same are not a homogeneous asset type at all. And I was like, Jesus, I've just turned an entire decade of my thinking completely on its head. So I think I may be wrong in that now, but in your opinion, what are the same problems that the industry is facing, geographically speaking? Give me some examples of different ones.
For sure. I think one of the mostly commonly mentioned area is data and analytics.
Okay.
So everyone was trying to understand how should they approach data, because they know they have a lot of data internally, and then they know they have access to a lot of data, external data sources. But then I think every company, at least back in 2017, 2018, was trying to think about a holistic data strategy. And then how can they combine the data so they could get insights about customer, about operations, about the building in general. So that was probably like a universal problem for most of the real estate companies. But one problem I would say, which looking back, I was like, wow, is ESG. Like ESG, this is commonly mentioned back in the days by all the Europeans and then some of the US, the leaders. They were talking about ESG, they're asking about ESG. However, you don't hear this commonly mentioned among Asia Pacific real estate companies. This has not been brought into their attention yet. So you kind of see the time lag in terms of regulations, because I think Europe is far ahead in terms of pushing a lot of them kind of environmental compliance and regulatory policies. Was I think US, there is a lag. And then you compare it with Asia Pacific, there is even a more of a time lag. But then now you look at everyone, ESG is becoming like a common headache for everyone. But back in 2018, I would say you definitely see people are, seeing this kind of in different priorities. Yeah. And another one, which, I think become more important in Asia, but then, for example, in Europe, probably you don't see it as much, as like a lot of things are more consumer facing. Like, for example, every shopping mall is almost adopting live streaming, right? Like, there is a booth, there is someone kind of touring the shopping mall around. But in Europe, people are worried about compliance, about customer data, about how much we should allow this to happen in our malls. Is this gonna violate any kind of privacies, and how should we approach it? So you definitely see a lot of geographic difference while you're talking with people, especially on the kind of leader perspective, in different geographies.
Okay, I'm going to
really
just jump
interesting.
by the way.
Can I, while you're doing that, can I ask a question, Alice, about really interesting geographical differences? What about, have you noticed any sort of cultural differences in terms of use of prop tech? What people are saying that they need from innovation, in terms of adoption? Any sort of cultural differences that you're aware of?
Huge. So I'll give one example, which I think is kind of my personal pain point after coming back to Canada. In terms of I feel like Asians, especially I think with Chinese, South Koreans, and Singaporeans, we're very digital savvy, and specifically with our mobile phones, because our phones can do everything. And coming back to Canada, at least, is not the case anymore. So in China, for a rental process, it's all one-stop shop. So I can go into leasing my place, go maybe in terms of go see my place with a small lock, pay my deposit, pay my rent, pay my utilities fees, find my cleaning lady, all in one app.
Wow.
This company is called Zroom, which is like, I think in my opinion, one of the greatest kind of prop tech company. So like, you were used to kind of that kind of process, one-stop shop rental process. And then, as almost like a foreigner in China, like going back to this and then having something like this is a lifesaver, because like I can do everything in one versus I have to like ask my friends, like, can you recommend me a cleaning lady? Can someone fix my toilet? But I guess now you can, go to TaskRabbit. But you know what I mean is like in North America, you need like 3 or 4 apps to kind of navigate around, and you have to know what these apps are. But in China, they just integrate it all in one. It's just like, hey, if you want to rent, use this. If you want to buy, use this. And like that kind of, I would say like seamless kind of experience, digital experience for me was just like, I was in a way, I think as a consumer, and then I think I'm really, really spoiled in that way. And then not to say, I think, at my workplace, because I travel a lot. So my company, what they do is we have a one-stop kind of, employee app. I think, maybe it's similar to what they call an tenant engagement app these days. But in my employment app, I can do everything in my app. So there's everything related. It's almost like a Workday plus, maybe with my Expedia. So everything is integrated into my Workday app, so call it. And then, as an employee, how like when I was in North America, I need to save all my receipts and invoices sometimes. Then I need to kind of scan it and then take a picture, and maybe my boss secretary will process it. And then like in China, I just basically order it from my phone, and then they keep the receipt is automatic. And like that whole experience, I think living in China as a consumer was just mind blowing. I think, this somehow I was like very proud. However, there are good parts about, I think, in terms of digital adoption among consumer. That was, I think, China was like, I really feel China was leading just because, there was so much competition. So everyone was competing to be like the one-stop shop in order to stand out. However, though, I was a little disappointed in the B2B space because, realizing how North America is advanced in terms of B2B SaaS. And then you almost realize like in China, this is an empty space because no one is really like you don't see a company even at a size like we're like probably the one of the biggest companies in China. Well, I haven't seen a lot of like B2B SaaS application that's applied across the world. So, and then that has been one of my questions when I was working in China. How come? And then what I realized is something like I thought it was super interesting is for a lot of the big companies in China, if they find a application that is super friendly, the first thing they do is not that they buy the service from the startup or from the tech company. They were trying to like, innovate internally. So they would have an internal version of whatever this, service would look like. So you see you don't see like a wildly applied application, B2B application. However, you see like an internal version of it. And then this is
I think, Alice, if I can just pick up on that, I think that is a very interesting insight, because that's what I've also heard previously, which is they build internally rather than buy or invest. And I think that there's actually 2 questions from me coming out of what you've just said. The first is actually very prop tech specific. And whilst we're not really here to talk about prop tech, we're here to talk about perhaps the real estate perspective of technology, because that's going to be an aspect of the book. I am interested in your insights about the technology marketplace, because traditionally North America was always the leader in terms of the number of startups, the amount of investment put forward. You mentioned that Fifth Wall was it was a later stage fund which was created in the North Americas, and then it went across, because in all of the research I had within Unisu, there were thousands of prop tech startups in North America. There were thousands in Europe. And yet China in particular, and India was another one, very, very, very small market for technology startups. They just, there were a few, but I mean, we're talking in the hundreds, in the low hundreds. There wasn't thousands, which you would expect given the population size. So my first question is that true? In terms of, did you feel that as well, given your experience? And I know with the work that you did in terms of mapping that sector with your accelerator, that you probably got some insights on that. So that's the first question. The second question, which I wouldn't mind you asking after that, is when we're talking about cultural differences, I really want to understand leadership within the organizations that you found over there as well. So I want to come on to that as the next question, because I'm interested in what I've called hierarchical deference in leadership positions in Asia versus other places. So to start with, Chinese market versus Europe and North American, is it fair of us to say that it's a relatively immature market in terms of the size, or am I unfair in saying that?
I wouldn't say, like, in terms of, so I think, we're focusing on prop tech here, right? Not general tech.
Yeah, prop tech specifically.
So if we're focusing on prop tech here, so actually I wrote a report, it's called Deep Dive in Prop Tech in China a few years ago. And what I've done is I compared the dates of when of the biggest kind of prop tech unicorns in US are funded versus China. So I did a comparison. So for people to kind of understand, like, straight off the bat, like, in terms of, like, let's just say WeWork, Airbnb, and then can I share my screen actually?
Yeah, you can. If
maybe
you go to
that's
the bottom,
better. Or
if you go to the bottom of the screen, there's a little share screen option in there, and that'll come up.
Yeah. So I can share my screen. Maybe this is a better.
Yeah, please do.
I feel like I'm gonna crash this. So.
Oh, don't worry.
Oh, so you know what? I'm just gonna go slow and then maybe share my insights. So there are a few things I kind of wanted to express through this comparison. It's because, like, the way you think about it, if the market has incubated some unicorns, especially where the capitals are chasing, this kind of reflects on basically when is your kind of industry like is at, because you see these money kind of start to chasing, and then if we can see just by the time they're funded and the size of them, you would say.
So Alice, just take us back in terms of this slide. So just explain this slide to us. This is a comparison of Chinese versus Western unicorns, right?
Prop tech unicorns.
Prop tech unicorns. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we also included things like Airbnb, like WeWork, like Compass, Procore, Open Door, and then we found also the unicorns in Chinese prop tech space, and then you realize there is a gap. And then there also is there are more, I think it's more clustered in China. There's a lot of short rental, there's a lot of co-working, there's a lot of listing and brokerages, whereas I think in the US is already more consolidated. So in this perspective, you see from the data, you would say US is ahead in terms of prop tech development, and then even in the consumer space. So if in the consumer space US is ahead, then definitely in the B2B space, where China is lagging in all perspective. So this is a chart hopefully addresses one of the questions. Is China is I would say like around maybe 3 to 5 years behind US in terms of our prop tech development. And a lot of these companies actually was built on the idea of a lot of the US counterparts. Like for example, Ucomain is like a direct kind of copycats of WeWork in China, which was built after 5 years when WeWork was funded. So things like that. However, though, China has its own characteristics. Like, for example, there is one that's related to home decoration platform. Which you would never see like being a unicorn in the US. That's because in China, everyone has to renovate their homes. So hopefully this, uncovers some facts, but then, and also, of course, this is a data back in 2020.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And there's always going to be market differences and all that. I just think unicorns are one thing, but I mean, general size of market is quite different between the two. So it's, I do find it fascinating. So moving on to that question about innovative leadership, I talked a lot in my experience in Hong Kong, where I still felt there was what I called hierarchical deference in leadership, which is that if you don't necessarily agree with leaders, or if you want to take something in a certain direction, you can't because of the hierarchy of leadership, and your boss is the one that makes the decisions, and he or she is the one that decides where you're going, and you don't challenge. Whereas perhaps in more innovative leadership circles, Amy, you might disagree with me in here. That psychological safety element is there, that you can challenge, or you feel empowered to make a bit of a difference. Am I fair in that? Do you feel that is still present in mainland China, and maybe that is it a good thing or is it a bad thing if that is the case for innovation and progress?
This is a very interesting question. I guess one of the things I notice about Chinese senior executives are they're very experiential. Like, they're willing to try things. I think they kind of, built their career being entrepreneurial. So versus, I think, a lot of the companies like a real estate company in the UK, which is probably hundreds of years. Like, think about it. The history of a lot of the Chinese real estate companies is probably less than 70 years, or like maybe 50 years, even like 20 or 30 years. So they grew to the size because they were being a bit more entrepreneurial and experiential. So they were very open to new ideas. So one of the reasons why Fifth Wall had a success fundraising in Asia is because, first of all, I think China, at least back in the days in 2018, is very open-minded. Like, they wanted to learn what the West is doing. They wanted to learn what's going on in the US. So they wanted to get access and then buy the information. So, and then the second thing is they just know, going back to one of the points we're making, they like to kind of innovate internally. The reason for that is the labor is cheap. So instead of I think buying a B2B SaaS, from a vendor, you can just hire a team of software engineer internally and do it. The cost is probably similar because, the cost of talents isn't as high as North America and in China. So we've seen this a lot, actually. We're working with a Vanke team. Vanke, actually, at its peak, they have almost 200 people working on data and tech related initiatives inside of Vanke. So Vanke is one of the top 3 real estate companies back in the days in China. And then just to kind of understand that scope is people in the US are very surprised. They never know any real estate companies in North America has 200 people working in tech and data function. This is unheard of back in 2018, at least. So it was I would say, if you have to kind of compare kind of apples to apples in terms of their approach, is I would say Chinese leader, they're more open to kind of new concepts and ideas. You spend less time persuading them. You just have to prove what is the real value to the business. And then usually it has to be more on the kind of upside. What I realized too is a lot of decision we make, they don't really care about cost saving. They care more about the upside. How do I increase my occupancy? How do I get more consumer? How do I make my space better? How do I kind of rank higher in terms of among my peer? So that's what they care a bit more.
So it's quite sort of sustainable innovation that's quite sustainable.
Yeah. So it's definitely, it's an interesting question, but I would say though, like this has a kind of big inertia, I would say, in North America. Is definitely you have to spend a lot of time. I wouldn't say persuading, but educating the leaders. But in China is almost like, you just have to prove the value. And then they would usually be like, there are a few strings attached. As long as you can prove it, I'm happy to kind of give it a try. But you might lose your job too, though, if you don't have a successful pilot.
So I love this picture that you're painting of this sort of entrepreneurial mindset at leadership level. And I also wanted to pick up on something that you talked about earlier in terms of use of these kind of apps that are sort of integrated. And I guess for apps and innovations to work, you need two things. You need something that's really good and fit for purpose, but you also need adoption. And it sounds like you have both of those things. So can you tell us a little bit about adoption? So I know that's, that is a big struggle, absolutely. In the UK, we have probably very traditional structures in lots of places, and that has that creates some issues sometimes in terms of adoption. What do you think's happening in China in terms of, how are people helping others to get on board with these new kind of technologies that are out there? How does adoption work?
I think, maybe the best way to kind of portray this is in truth perspectives. The first perspective is like something you just have to download. For example, for my workplace, I just have to download a P9 app because, all of my employee information is there. Like I need to use it for my work. It's my pass, is where I log in, right? It's my security pass. So that is a must download kind of app. And some, like you said, a lot of the good to have apps, like for adoption. One of the things I have to say is China has WeChat. And if you really understand the value of WeChat, you know how brilliant this thing is. And then there's something called a mini app. So no company really needs their own app. You just need a WeChat, and inside of WeChat, you can have a mini app. So I think it decreases an inertia for people to adopt, because all I need to do, and sometimes, is you just have to provide me with an incentive for me to use this thing. And then I can quickly just pull up my WeChat. I can go to my mini app and do it. So this is almost, what is a good analogy? Is almost like, it's almost like you have a browser, you have a Google Chrome, and then any kind of gadget, you can just like quickly download and you can start use it. So you don't have to download like another application on your computer in order to use that. So it was extremely convenient. So I think adoption, most people never find that to be a problem. I think it was more about how to kind of do customer acquisition, which sometimes, it will be attached to a bonus. Like, for example, if you log into an app today, I give you 10% off. Or if you log in every time something, I give you like 50 points, and then you can use this 50 points to redeem something. So in terms of like, I haven't really seen difficulties in terms of digital adoption. Just people know, like, I don't need to download a new app. I just quickly search something on my WeChat app, and then this mini program. I think, that is one of the reasons why Elon Musk is like really try to change Twitter, X, because, he sees like the power of kind of the whole WeChat ecosystem and how easy it has become for everyone. Because it's just like, I don't have to enter my customer information anymore because WeChat already know. I don't have to insert my payment, information anymore because I have my WeChat Pay, and then my address is there. Everything is streamlined. All I have to do is basically I have to log into my mini app. That's the whole process. And then
I completely agree. He is building the application of convenience, which is the Western version of WeChat. I mean, that's 100% true. Could I just take this in a slightly different direction, more to the sort of the incumbent sector rather than the sort of the innovation space? Given all of your experience across the venture side and the traditional side, what's your What's your view on innovation within the built environment at the moment? Where are we as a sector?
That's a really big question. I don't know if I can address that, but I would just, speak of my experience. So first of all, unfortunately, right now we are in an economic down cycle. And then I think everyone knows that when interest rate is really high, all the real estate companies are going to suffer. And then when the real estate company are suffering, what we noticed is innovation is often the first one to be cut. So these days, I think it has been extremely difficult, I think, not only for the real estate companies, but also for the PropTech startups, because, you will find a lot of companies have very low budget in terms of trying new things. So
just before you go on, why do you think it's, I mean, traditionally, it used to be the HR budget was cut. Now it seems the innovation budget is cut. So why, in your opinion, why is it that the innovation budget is cut when there's an economic downturn? What's the reason for that?
Because I feel like in terms of innovation, there's something called a must-haves and something called a good-to-have. So must-have is something like, in term to be future-proofing, you need it. Like, or else you're falling behind, you can't compete, or you're not going to win the customer. I'll give you an example. I think these days, ESG is a must-have. If any real estate company is not working on their ESG strategies, getting it correct, like they're just definitely falling behind. Another thing everyone should be working on these days is data and analytics, right? How to make business more efficient? How do I know more about my customer behavior so I can extend customer lifetime value? If companies are not working on these two things, then I don't know what else, on innovation front they should be focusing their time on. But there is something
so let me play the devil's advocate on that, which is in order to hit various sustainable development goals, or to enable you to have a much better data infrastructure, or to understand your data much better, I would argue that needs a technology layer applied, or it needs some technological innovation to help support the next step for these real estate companies to develop better ESG strategies or data strategies. So again, I come back to, if they are must-haves, if the industry needs that in order to hit various things it needs, why are they cutting back in the very area that is going to support them with that?
I think you were assuming, or the hypothesis is everyone is ready to already save on ESG, or ready to build a data department. I think the harsh reality is there's only a handful of companies that are ready for that revolution. So I think most companies are still getting their kind of foundations ready. And to get the foundation already is not so much right now about, having the different types of technology solutions. Is at least, how do you get your internal reporting correct? How do you make sure your data is streamlined and cleaned and structured? These were, I think, step number one of what the real estate companies are facing. And in terms of adding fancy applications and tech startups on top of that is almost useless until you have something internally for them to utilize. So I think a lot of companies are rushing into maybe what I call a 2.0 stage, is oh, I'm working with the startups. You're not there yet. Why don't you, make sure what you have internally is ready to use? So it's almost you have to do some house cleaning before you even go there. And so I think, a good example is you see a lot of smart buildings solutions out there. I think every company would need that, of course. But I will give an example is things like fault detection and predictive maintenances. They need the building to have basic digital infrastructure. But I think, unless you're a Class A, building, you have to ask your property or asset management team, is your building digital proof? Do you have the up-to-date digital system for your building for us to even implement it? So you see a lot of startups actually struggling because they get no data from the building. How do you do predictive maintenances if you're not able to get the building data? So I do think, what you mentioned is ideally, I would want it the industry overall have that problem. Is like, oh, it's only a budget problem. But I think right now is a foundation, is an infrastructure problem. We need to get the necessary data and digital infrastructure for us to even apply the application. So if that makes sense.
So frustrating, Alice, isn't it?
I think it's not. It's because our industry is old. Like, we have always operated, certain way, and no one. It's almost like this is set upon us, and then we need to catch up all of a sudden, and then everyone's like, "But we have been doing this for ages, and nothing is wrong, right?" So I think it just takes some time, and then. I would say though, like, I feel like very sorry for a lot of like lower class buildings, like Class B, Class C, because it would take them way longer. So sometimes I wonder if they should just be converted into a new use versus, I think, being an empty office space or getting fines from like, their ESG mandate. So I think there are a lot of interesting things going to happen in the next few years in terms of the overall commercial real estate, given the remote working, given the ESG mandate. So I'm actually very excited. I think it's a great opportunity for the industry to kind of just march ahead and then do something differently.
Can I ask you, what are you most excited about?
I'm very excited about. So for me, I've always been really, inspired, and then also just like, I'm just curious about more like on the consumer front. Like, sometimes I ask myself, why do I prefer going into one shopping mall over the other one? Why do I like Whole Food versus, other grocery, grocery stores, like things like that. So when I was at Oxford specifically, we did a lot of like, initiatives related to our shopping malls, because, Oxford owns like a few of the Canada's best shopping malls. And then we know we're number one in sales, but then we wanted to, keep that, and we wanted to kind of expand that. So we wanted to have a customer have the great time here, spend more here, and then have the best brands in the malls. So we're doing a lot of different pilots to kind of see that. And then also, if people know kind of the shopping mall space, there's something called like, it's basically kind of how your store placed next to each other, and you see the cross-selling effects. So these kind of data points really excites me, just because you're learning so much about consumer behavior, and in terms of now you're really utilizing the data to make decisions. So back in the day, you need a very experienced broker to know who to place in here. Now it's all data driven. The customer profile, the best stores to put into a shopping mall, and what to put next to it. So always like seeing those kind of data and capturing like a lot of like kind of consumer data, their real-time traffic data, really inspires me, because you were like, oh, that is really the value of for us building a very robust kind of data layer about our building, about the real actions, real consumer behaviors, and then also just a customer profile. So these are some like application I would say like makes me like super excited about still how the physical world will become better.
Can you tell us anything about what you've seen in that data? So, you gave an example of shopping malls. What is it that draws customers to them? What are some of the cool things? Is there anything unexpected in that data?
I think what it was also very interesting. So I'm a big shopper. I'm like a shopperholic. So that's why like I feel like when I was on the mall innovation project, I was like perfect. Like I find like a better spot for myself, because I used to work on construction tech. When I was
less exciting.
No, it was. I think it was more impactful, because you're making sure how you can minimize casualties on construction sites by having different types of technology and IoT applications. But then that's more like on a social impact perspective. But then this is like really my personal interest. And then what is also very interesting too is because I shopped all over the world. So I shopped a lot in Hong Kong. So I think, James, if you go to like malls in Hong Kong, you would be like, this is like a paradise for shopping, right? So a lot of times, when I come to North America, you'll find like, I feel like, I had more fun in Asia versus North America. So my GM, so my general manager at the shopping mall was just asking me like, why? Like, why do you think like Asia mall operators has done a better job versus, us? So, and then I had to really think about that. I think, one of the reason is because, the way they kind of structure the stores, like in Asia, it was very easy. Like, you found your cosmetics in the first floor, you found your shoes maybe on the underground, you found your women's clothes on the second floor, your food and beverages and fifth and sixth floor. So like it's very structured. So you know what to get once you're there. But in the North America, they specifically wanted things to be crossed. Like, I would want to put a parallel with like a shoe with maybe a Walmart. And so it took me a while to kind of understand the mentality. But again, when I think about it and when the data shows, actually makes a lot more sense because, you if you bought the shoes already, you might want to match it with an outfit versus I think, in China, it's more like almost like you're bringing more competition because I'm never settled down on one outfit because I know I may see something better on next door. So it was like things like that. It was like a lot of like, I think psychology and also like cultural differences among people that I think, how different malls are structured differently. And maybe another perspective is on delivery. Delivery, I think, I don't know about the UK. In Canada, and I live in Toronto, so I'm lucky. So things maybe arrive within 2 days. But in China, if I live in Shanghai, everything I order online can arrive within 1 day. Like there's no exception unless it's like specifically told you. It's almost like, as a seller, you get fined if this is more than 1 day. So you have to think about the convenience goes into like the delivery services or and the automation that kind of China's delivery system allows you logistics system. But in Canada, I think, people were allowing this time lag. And then, so back at Oxford and with the shopping malls, we're trying to solve that problem as well. It's like, if you shop at, one of the Oxford shopping malls, can you get the service delivered to you within a day? Like, can we do that? And how much would it take? So I think, I think a lot of like top tier companies are definitely thinking about that. And then we're trying to make the experience a more pleasant for the shoppers. And then I would say there are so many interesting things happening. And then there are a few companies which I was super bullish on now, like all raised a lot of big money. So I was generally happy about that. The last thing I want to mention is probably virtual touring and virtual so there's a lot of things. So people will either shop in the store and show people virtual shopping, or so this is already kind of a top kind of trends in Asia already, but I haven't seen as much in North America. You definitely see stuff, but then it's more on the outlet, is on the sales items versus I think in China you can also pivot as a luxury sale because you see your favorite model is wearing it. So things like that.
I know the founder of a company called the co-founder of a company called ConfoWith, which is the new technology that helps people connect people to help them shop and take them through products. And it's a really interesting concept. I just wanted to pick up on something. You talked about deliveries and how do people in real estate strike this balance between people wanting the convenience of being able to shop online, and obviously it's great being able to shop online, having something delivered in the same day, but how can real estate make it appealing for people to also go into buildings? Have you seen anyone doing anything interesting in terms of innovation to get people to keep coming into buildings?
You mean
as opposed to staying online?
In terms of like work or in terms of play?
I think both. It's a really hot topic, isn't it? You know,
It is. I don't know. I don't know.
Alice, while you think, I'm going to tell you one thing. I think just about summarising what you've just said there about, what makes you go into one shopping centre than the other.
Yes.
And I think it comes back a lot. And data will tell you the sort of the trends and the patterns, but it won't give you the sort of the empathetic feeling and the emotion that goes behind it. And I think this says a lot actually for whether it be retail, whether it be buildings, whether residential, or whether it be commercial buildings, in the sense that when you often talk as a parent, which I am, you'll often talk about it's not what someone says to you, it's how they make you feel, in terms of sort of the understanding sort of, I suppose, the bullying side of things, which is, they will tell nasty things to you, or they might actually say something not so nasty, but how you feel about what they said is actually more empowering and more demonstrating of the impact of that. And I think it's the same for buildings. I remember so clearly, I went to Singapore, and when you mentioned about Hong Kong, went to a mall in Hong Kong, and it made me feel amazing just walking around and the experience of the building, the light and the greenery, because it was a lot of green plants actually in both of them, and they made me feel alive just walking through the building. So I couldn't tell you what was in the shops. I literally did not look at them, but I felt amazing going in there, so I would go back. And I think that is really what sets aside. It could be the best shopping mall in the world, but if the experience is bad, I wouldn't bother about going to the shops, but I would go back to the mall that made me feel great, because it was a good experience. So yeah, that was just my observation on that. But
I think what you're saying, James, is data is useful for that, but data can't tell you the whole picture, because some of it is about
it's got to be more holistic than that, for sure.
And I know what you mean, and I do agree with you, Alice. I think malls and things in Asia do this brilliant. I lived in Singapore for a couple of years. They make the shopping experience amazing. They fill it with plants and light and, amazing service and all of those things. Same in Japan, actually, really amazing shopping experiences in Japan. But yeah, I guess just if you have any insights about things that you see buildings doing to encourage people into them, to make people want to go into them rather than choosing the easier option of staying at home, that would be super interesting. But
it's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
It is. I also feel like, so I have always, I think earlier in my career, I worked in financial services. So I was in underwriting for commercial, for mezz loans. And so and I've always worked in a cubicle, and I just thought, this is what everyone around me also worked in, right? Like cubicles. But when I was in, a tech environment, it just all of a sudden changed. It's all open desk. Your boss is next door to you. You eat lunch together. And then all the coffees are free, and then, they would get fruit plate. You just feel like, I wanted to work there. I think as a young people, I can tell why so many people kind of pivot into tech, and then including me, even though I didn't directly pivot, I was in venture, but it's just, I think it was a different working environment. I think that's what our younger generation has been kind of more appealed to. And then, so my experience at Oxford, especially because I, for part of my time I was actually leading a co-working strategy for the tech and data department. And what we realized is whenever we were saying what, today we would have snacks. And then on Thursdays, there is free lunch. There is going to be snacks. There's sometimes wine. People, more people come. It just, I think it was more about the social experience more than anything now, going back to work. Because to be honest, if you have to commute 2 hours, no one really wanted that anymore. But But the people also wanted that social experience. Like, for example, I think one of the biggest disadvantage of me being an entrepreneur right now, have my own practice, is I don't get to interact with people on a daily basis. I only see people virtually, which I miss a lot, like meeting people. So, so it was, as I think about it, it's like, I think in a point, like a lot of companies just to realize, you just need to provide that open space of freedom, the flexibility, and also some perks to get people back. And then I also think, remote working is here to stay. Just personally, how I have experienced it. I think, you all wanted to spend a few days in the office, but then I would say, I think companies has to pay more if, they definitely wanted the employees to come back 5 days a week. At least it's what we see in Canada. Like, one of my friends works in the biggest real estate company here in Canada. They have to go back 5 days a week. And she says she has seen a lot of turnover in the back, like, past 2 years, just because there are a bunch of companies providing that flexibility versus, few that can't. So it was also very interesting. I don't know, James, maybe you don't agree with me. And then I just feel like, I'm talking to the real estate industry here. And then ideally, I think, everyone wanted us back 5 days a week. But, I have to say, like, all the good things about Oxford, though. Even though we're a real estate company, I think, they're being super accommodating. So they provided us with flexibility during COVID. And then we're able to kind of adopt a more hybrid strategy versus, going back 5 days a week.
Yeah, it's good. And I think, if I may, I'm not sure there's a straightforward answer. I think everybody's looking for a very binary, exact answer to that whole question, whether it be retail, whether it be office. And I don't think there is one. I don't think it will settle for a good 5 to 10 years. I think the buildings, the employees that will win are those that are currently flexible, so that they understand the lay of the land with their current employees, because they've also got to consider it's not about the current employees they have, it's about the next churn of employees from the expectations they bring from other workplaces in, but also the next generation who are the COVID generation, who have done everything remote in their education and are coming into the workplace. So I'm afraid I am very strong on the fact that leadership at the moment is looking too short term. I think shareholders, stakeholders are looking too short term. I think we are going to be in trouble in the next 5 years with leases expiring and looking to be renewed. And I think leaders need to take a bold decision about probably taking more office space than you need, probably not where you were, but being flexible for now and analyzing and thinking for the first time as an employee first type initiative or a retailer first initiative, and letting the dust settle when you've got both the qualitative and quantitative analyses, and then making that decision for then the next decade after that. We are too close to everything at the moment. But anyway, I could go on about that forever, and I'm not going to bore everybody with that. But just, Alice, if you don't mind, I've got a couple more questions. I hope you don't mind answering. I'm just very conscious of your time. And Amy, because I know she's in Birmingham, which is a lovely place to be, Amy.
It is.
I'd like to take you back a little bit, because obviously you've mentioned Oxford a couple of times, and I want to come on to Oxford as my sort of final question, because do you know Dean Hopkins? I'm from Oxford, so I'm actually with Dean tomorrow. We're actually got to talk with him tomorrow. You're not around, Amy, are you, tomorrow?
Not tomorrow, no.
It's only Birmingham. So I'm with Dean tomorrow. So I'd like to sort of just understand a little bit more about the experience you've had with those guys. But talk to me about Urban Lab, because Urban Lab was an accelerator out in mainland China. You obviously had partnerships with both JLL, who many people will be aware of, and Swire, which probably many people won't. I've had the great fortune of knowing Anthony for a long time, who was very, very forward-thinking in what he was doing at Swire. And so I'd like to just understand a little bit about, Urban Lab. Why was it set up? How did you get the partnerships? What was the thought behind it? How did it go from a success perspective? I know you certainly did one cohort. I don't know if it's then followed on. Just give me, wax lyrical for me about why did you set it up? How did it get set up? How was it measured in terms of success? And, you know, what did you learn from the experience? One question has become 4. So I'd just love to know.
No, it's good to kind of, you know, recall my memories on that. So what happens is, because, you know, I talked to a lot of, like, you know, I was at football, like I had an opportunity to kind of interact with a lot of real estate leaders in APAC, and then Anthony, I think, was leading new ventures at Swire back in the day. So I talked to Anthony while I was still at football, and then I got to know Jordan, which was, you know, I think heading also PropTech for JL in Greater China plus Hong Kong. So I got to know those boys, you know, while I was still in the US. So when I went back to in China, so I reached out to them. So I was like, you know, I'd love to kind of catch up with you guys on, you know, on a regular basis and see what you guys are doing. So we end up, like, you know, realizing we're doing very similar things. So we're just like bringing interesting startups to work with internal teams. Either we think about how do we pilot internally, potentially we invest in them, or from the P&L's perspective, we might do mergers and acquisitions, but then I don't think those guys will. So we're like, you know, we're doing similar things anyways. And then I was just very, because I'm new to the whole ecosystem. Like, think about it. Like, I lived like 10 years in North America, and then all of a sudden I went to Shanghai. I have to take this role, which I'm supposed to be a kind of ecosystem builder with my boss in the China PropTech space. I was like, how do I even start? So I caught up with those boys like for a bit. And then I was like, you know, if we're doing very similar things, why don't we do this in a bigger scale? I said, you know, because, you know, the most effective ways is like, you know, if we can collect a whole cohort of companies and see if, you know, how they can be applied to our internal systems. So I kind of applied the fifth of fall methodology, is like each one of us come up with our common problems and key pain points, and then we'll list about 3 of them, each one of us. And then we said, maybe, you know, this is where we can start. These are the common problems we have. These are very company specific problems. So, you know, we kind of, I think in the end, we have 9 sectors we focus on. Like, for example, from P&L's perspective, we focuses on more on construction related technology, and then smart city, and then also anything that's more related to kind of internal process. And then for JL is, you know, typical JL business, like leasing is more on brokerages. And then for Swire, they have a lot of shopping malls and retail, the shopping malls and hotels in China. So they have like the top tier malls. So they wanted to see the application in that space. So we're like, you know, let's just, you know, go out with these nice segments, and then let's see who we can work with. And then we found the sponsors, and luckily our bosses are extremely supportive. And then I think, not to say though, we're like 3 very I would say powerful companies in the real estate industries in China. So it took us maybe half a year to put this whole thing together. It went on extremely smoothly, almost like, you know, we passed, every single one of us passed our board meeting like first goal. Like our like, you know, we never even had to kind of go through like, you know, I think everyone was waiting for it. It was just, I think, you know, we thought this has so much synergy. So we're, you know, instead of us spending all our time and effort, why don't we do it together? So we had a good publicities. And then I think the first cohort, we had about 160 companies apply. And then in the end, we kind of kept top 12. And then each one of us piloted with 2 or 3 companies in the end.
And
so
Alice,
really
just help me understand that. So you put out, and I'm just trying to work this out, because I think this is really, it's a useful example of how a corporate innovation structure can work. So an accelerator or an incubator is often used by some companies. So you're saying you put a strategy together with 2 other partners which had similar problems in JLL and Swire.
Yes.
You had 3 people who, I would say the companies are big names, but you also had obviously Jordan, Anthony, and yourself, who were, you know, big similar mindsets around innovation. So you had a shared mindset, you had a shared vision. It took you 6 months to put together. You just invited people to apply for your accelerator. And was it an accelerator? Did you put money into the companies? Did you take equity in the companies? What was the offer made for them to apply out of interest?
So because it's our first cohort, the mandate was, for this one, we're just testing the water. First, we wanted to see what the whole ecosystem looks like. So our promise to our management is we will give you a holistic view of at least what the current stage or current landscape of PropTech looks like in China, in Greater China. The second is we promised a lot of our department sponsors that we're going to find them 1 or 2 solutions at least that's going to help them solve some key problems. They don't have to promise they have to implement the pilots right away, but at least they know there are a few things under their radar they're ready to pilot right now or not. Each one of us specifically, we choose a pilot site in, among our portfolio companies or, among our just our kind of assets. So we know there is at least one pilot by one company. And then we didn't promise any investment, but then because we used an accelerated operator who has a great network of investors in their network, so everyone is invited to the demo day. So basically what we have done is, and then our management also asked us, whether it's necessary to put together a fund to invest in PropTech in China. So that was a problem we have to solve. I think Urban Lab is now on its 3rd cohort. I think the next year is going to be the 4th year. I think, they're slowly trying to put up together and fundraise for a small fund. But then I think for the first few cohort, there's no formal investment structure yet. But then it is up to the company like Swire JLL or Pinon whether they wanted to invest in those companies. So from Pinon's perspective, a lot of the companies are way too small for us to consider. We do have a venture arm, but then they only do deals maybe like 100 million for the round.
I love that. Only 100 million for the round. Some of those companies, they'd be biting your hand off. And Amy, you'll excuse me because we're moving away from that sort of cultural.
No, that's great.
Side, but I think it's really it's important for some to understand the mechanics of that bit. So, and this is quite interesting because when I was over in Hong Kong, I've never heard such talk about this before, and you've mentioned it a couple of times about POCs and proof of concepts. And I just want to make sure, so when they went into the accelerator, were you giving them the opportunity on proof of concept, or were you giving them the opportunity to essentially try their technology within the portfolio of JLL, Swire, etc., as a pilot project? Because I think there's a lot of terminology challenges that we have across the industry. And really a proof of concept is simply, would this work as an idea? And it's almost testing the industry just on a cerebral level, whereas the pilot is actually going in with a potential MVP and testing it. So where was your accelerator in terms of the opportunity for those 12?
I think all innovation initiatives start with a POC. Unless you have proven POC, you don't really carry into pilot stage, because at a pilot stage, you're actually testing it out. So what I think back in the days, what we have done is at least we have a site. The site is ready. If your technology is ready, we're ready. So, for example, in Swire shopping malls, if the robotics, if your robotics back in the days, I think it was more for cleaning. If the cleaning robots is ready, we're ready to kind of implement it at a smaller scale initially, maybe office, like off the traffic hours. But then if it is proven that this is effective, and then it has to be, by the local decision maker, which is the GM of the Swire property mall, they found it useful because in the end, the ones who are making the actual decision is the one who is providing the budget. So I think, so this goes back to some of the challenges with corporate innovation, is because like, even though I know the technology, I know the startup, but then because I don't control the budget, so everything that has to be implemented has to be from the kind of execution phase. So they are the one making the final decision. I as a corporate innovation manager or team lead, I can only recommend. I can help the sponsor find the right technology or the best one doing what they wanted this company to do. But then I don't make the decision to say you are going to stay and then you are going to be the final contestant to win the bid. So I think that is how I see it, is like we're at the innovation stage that we recommend you, we select these companies. However, the effectiveness, that is to the execution phase to say, okay, we're going to keep this as our partner.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That definitely helps. Right, last question for me, because this has gone on for a lot longer than I expected. So many apologies, but that must show the quality of the conversation. Oxford.
Yes.
So, talk to me about innovation at Oxford. How did you find it? How was the structure and the setup? What was good and what was to be improved about innovation within Oxford Properties and obviously Canada and the US?
I think hands down, Oxford is a leader. Not only to say, I think our management was quite relatively young, so they were super entrepreneurial, super innovative, and open-minded. Mm-hmm. And then also, I think one of the perks that Oxford enjoys being in the leader in the real estate innovation space is because Oxford owns a multiple asset types. So we have shopping malls, we have hotels, we have office buildings and warehouses, multifamily. And the best part about these assets is like we own the best of these assets. So our malls in Canada are the best. Our hotels are like Fairmont and Whistler in Banff. So all of those are the best kind of asset types. So we don't really worry about, like I said, a lot of the infrastructure layer anymore, because they're all already built in. So a lot of there is more room for us to play around with. So definitely, I think we're pioneer in terms, not we, they now, they're a pioneer in terms of adopting technology. And also Dean, if you know Dean's background, he actually has more tech background. So he's always been kind of promoting and been advocating technology. And then inside Oxford, they've been building a really robust kind of cybersecurity program. And then also we did a lot of data automation using a robotic process automation. A lot of the kind of internal reporting functions, at least, are being automated. So you see a lot of kind of savings in terms of efficiency in budget and in time. So, but there's one thing I really want to mention about Oxford's use of technology and data, is what I have seen in Oxford and haven't seen in a lot of other places, is how well Oxford is utilizing data in terms of informing our investment and capital allocation strategies. So you see, a lot of teams, as far as I'm aware of, the investment teams are making decision off the opportunities. So they do like a macro analysis, but this is based on experience. This is based on a lot of times MDs or the head of investments personal insights into the market. But Oxford has truly developed a strategy which is using external data to inform that capital allocation strategy. So what they do is basically they have been building what they call like an allocation framework, basically based on a lot of the macroeconomic data, demographics about the cities, infrastructure, their innovation index, their government, their transparency. So all of the macro indexes about different cities and different markets. And then at the same time, they look into factors that really affect different asset types. So what really affect industrial about hotels, shopping malls, and then they have their called the macro and the micro indexes. So, and then, using their internal model, they basically developed kind of decision-making matrix. So what are some asset types and in what market you should buy? what are some asset types in what market you should like right now just sell. And then so a lot of the decisions like made on the board each year is actually going over this allocation framework and to say, okay, is this validated by the personal insights, by expert interviews? Because now you're basically using the data driven decisions, and then you have validated. So a lot of times you see how to effectively kind of allocate resources and then capitals in making like investment decisions, and you are like, this is really, really powerful. And then I was just like, I think personally, I think being part of Oxford and seeing this, I was very proud, I think, at least getting exposure into how companies, real estate companies is starting making decision. Like it's almost like it's kind of like a quant fund, and then we're able to develop this capability. So that is probably, I would say, one thing that made a strong impression of on why I say that Oxford Properties is definitely a leader in terms of adopting data and technology.
Fantastic. Well, I tell you what, I will. I shall be interviewing Dean tomorrow. And actually, he and I have been in sort of similar circles for many, many years, but never spoken. So it'll be quite interesting.
Well, say hi to him, because yeah. So I worked under him.
Cool. I'll say hi. And Amy, I promise I shall ask about the nice bit as well. In your absence. And see what it says. But so for this for the good of everybody, I'm going to turn the live stream off now. But Alice, Amy, just give us a second and I'll do it. But Alice, just publicly, thanks ever so much.
Thank you so much.